So, welcome everybody.
Me as well as an OG. So.
You can all hear me all right? Okay, excellent. So you've all made a very good choice in coming to this session. What we don't want to do is scare the living daylights out of you, but you are going to see there's a big opportunity for the people here in this room, and everyone else who hasn't come here is about to lose out. So we're going to talk about the topic of cookies, which have been the currency of the ad tech world for over 10 years now. But because of Google, it's all about to change. And that could have quite a significant impact on the way we run our marketing and our businesses. So we want to discuss that today. And I'm delighted to have Riaz and Paul with me on the panel, two real industry experts. And we're going to talk a bit about the sort of the background, but then dig into a lot of the solutions you should be thinking about today in preparation for when the big change happens. So we're going to do this in two parts. I'm going to give you a bit of background. So we're going to talk about the journey to the position today, timeframes and some of the dependencies, because you've probably read in the press that Google were going to switch off cookies, then they weren't, then they were, then they weren't. Some of the reasons around that. We're going to scare you with the do-nothing impact. So if you all want to sit there and do nothing going forwards, you won't be doing that at the end of this session. But then we're going to look at the options that we should be thinking about now and starting to put in place, and some of the things that some organisations have already put in place. So that's the plan. So I'll spend about 10 minutes running through the background, then we'll get into the conversation around sort of solutions for you. So these are the latest figures coming out of the Digital Readiness Survey that's being run and will continue to be run until, I think, the end of August? End of July. So could you just have a quick show of hands in this room? Who's currently using third-party cookies in their marketing? Yes, quite a few. Okay. Quick show of hands. Who's actually put a solution in place for when third-party cookies get switched off? One, four. So probably about 5 or 6 with some wavy hands out there as well. So the research has shown us that out of the people who've responded to the survey, 64% of the B2B marketplace is currently reliant on third-party cookies. 77% anticipate there's going to be challenges when they disappear. That's a lot of people are getting quite concerned. And 40% haven't started thinking about what the future option's going to be. So, you know, there's a level of awareness that things are about to change. And it's been slightly likened to GDPR, when everyone was talking about it for a while, and then suddenly it happened, and it was like a, oh, Jesus, what do we do now moment. So, a little bit of Cookies 101. So, just very elementary stuff. A lot of people will know about this. But effectively, when you go to a website, if you allow cookies to be operating, registers that you are interested in their product. And then behind the scenes, there will be a advertising service that places a third-party cookie against your IP address. And then that tracks your general browsing behavior when you go to other sites. So it's the sort of the currency of understanding, the identity of understanding where you are on the web and the sort of things you're interested in. And the reason we use that is it helps us with ad selection, conversion measurement, all these things that allow us to target relevant ads to us when we go online. But the challenge with cookies are you're not always aware who's using your information and for what. So that's been the sort of the issue with them to date. The reason Google is so significant here is basically it's got 2/3 the global market share for browsing. So it's going to be a big, big change when they stop allowing third-party cookies. So the quick timeline of how we've got to where we've got to is all started off with GDPR. So in 2016, the sort of GDPR concepts were agreed. We then saw in 2017, Safari stopped using third-party cookies. Then that was followed by Firefox. So the writing was on the wall for the cookie quite a while ago. So we've already started to see a little bit of an impact. Then Google announced that it was going to phase out third-party cookies in 2020. 2021, it introduced its privacy sandbox, which was going to be its solution going forwards. And it was then going to phase out third-party cookies in 2023. And obviously we're in 2024, so we know that hasn't happened. So it was going to happen this summer. So interestingly enough, when we started planning this talk a couple of months ago, we were basically going to be saying, was it September time?
Yeah.
September time, no more cookies. That's now changed because there's been pushback from the Competition Markets Authority, and we'll go into that a little bit of why they are getting concerned around this sort of sudden change and the speed of the change. So the latest phasing out date is next year, sometime, dependent on when they're allowed to go ahead with it. So very quickly, Privacy Sandbox from Google, its goals are basically to use less personal data when serving ads. So what Google Sandbox tries to do is categorize your areas of interest into overall headings. So it may be something, say, like sports or travel you're interested in, as opposed to you're obsessive with mountain bikes and buying bikes and things like that. There's obviously a lot of money that goes into this space. So with Sandbox, they've got to be able to introduce something that allows organizations, and them in particular, to maintain ad revenue. And there's also got this sort of balancing of stakeholders' interests. So you've got the users' interest, advertisers' interests, regulators' interests. So it's sort of, what can this new solution look like? Now, there's been some criticisms of this. One has been around the effectiveness of it. So when a number of the trials have been run actually on the proposed iterations of the sandbox, the results haven't been that amazing. So the level of targeting that's being offered isn't necessarily as good as is available today. And there's also a big concern over whether Google, because it's market dominant in this space, would create its own monopoly. And that's been very great concern. And this is really where the Competition Markets Authority and the Information Commissioner have now started getting quite actively involved. And they actively put the brakes on Google's move this year. And they want to see changes. They want to become more comfortable that basically Google's not creating its own market for its own personal benefit. It needs to be of benefit to all users of the web. And there's also further concerns, particularly from the ICO, that there could be privacy issues as well. That could be compromised. So we've already seen a little bit of this happening. So as you remember from the time chart, in 2017, Safari stopped supporting third-party cookies. And the impact of that was that the targetable market for people directly interested, as opposed to just out there on the web, decreased by almost 80%. So there was a dramatic decrease. And this is effectively saying the same thing as well. So this is looking at Facebook. So Facebook also saw the number of relevant targeted individuals, organizations significantly dropping by about 70 to 80%. But actually, the cost to target the relevant people increased significantly because there wasn't that volume available to be targeted. And because the targeting wasn't as effective, the amount of money being put into Facebook decreased, so they actually started losing out on revenue as well. So that kind of sets the scene a little bit. So what we wanted to do is now come to our experts to start discussing some of these things. So I wanted to come to Riaz first. So we've seen this sort of reduction in the move from Safari. Have B2B marketeers started to see any impact of that yet? Do you think? Riaz?
I think the biggest thing that we'll all have seen as B2B marketers is the GA4 switch off of Universal Analytics to move to GA4. That was driven by the change in the back end from Google using third-party cookies to using first-party cookies to do tracking. And we all felt the pain, I think, of that shift. When it comes to advertising, today it's 1% of all Chrome users have this new privacy sandbox switched on. So we're not seeing very much today. And that's there primarily for the ad tech world to test and understand what they need to do to work in this new environment. But the big change is coming when in early mid 2025, when it gets switched off. And the impact there is huge, as we saw when Safari switched it off and when Apple switched off mobile IDs on iPhone.
So would you expect to see another, sort of, say, 80% reduction in targetable?
I think as marketers, we have to think about the world of advertising a bit differently today. I think if you stay as you are today, what will happen is the number of targetable users, if you remember the slide from earlier, the people on the very old versions of Chrome, you can still target them, but that population is going to be tiny. And so the demand for those small numbers of cookies is going to grow, so you're going to pay higher CPMs to access what is effectively the laggards in the market. Now, for some companies that may be fine, for others, probably less so. The vast majority of people will not have targetable cookies, and so if again you're just targeting broadly across the whole market, we should see the CPMs for those drop. But of course, from your perspective as marketers, you're now not targeting your niche, you're targeting a massive market. And so your wastage is dramatically higher. So instead of doing that, you have to look to alternative channels, which we can go into now. I think we're going to go into that later, aren't we?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Riaz. Now, I was interested, actually, so Paul has some quite strong views on the value of cookies today, anyway. So, shouldn't we really be bothered about this, Paul? Are cookies fundamentally not that useful in B2B marketing?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I've been on the client side of the industry for, we're saying, close to 30 years, 30 years, and I've moved over to the other side in terms of the MarTech, and part of that was a personal journey in my level of ignorance as a client-side marketeer as to this part of my marketing mix, because it worked. I didn't need to worry about it. Talking with the co-founders at FunnelFuel, where I work as a CMO, the education I've gone through in terms of the reality that I'd bought into, paid checks for, with my agency partners and my internal stakeholders, filled me with dread as to how ignorant I was about this part of my mix, because it worked. And the reality is, when I find out that the average lifespan of a cookie is 29 days, I think the quickest B2B sales I've made in my career is probably 3 or 4 months. And typically, if you're selling big systems, etc., it's a year, 18 months. And I kind of started to question, well, what was I buying for 10 or 15 years? Yeah. The industry itself has built up this kind of myth about that tracking. Having said that, the cookies are important in terms of identifying an individual through the supply chain. But an individual, we know B2B is a buying community and a buying group of people, not necessarily an individual. So that's one of the main reasons I've joined FunnelFuel, because I think we've got the potential to lead a degree of awareness and some solutions to resolving that moving forward.
Okay. So your view would be, you've got a long sales cycle, the use of cookies is less than if you've got a pretty short sales cycle.
I think the use of cookies has been less valuable than I believed it to be in my career.
Right.
But I didn't know.
Okay.
It's only now that this comes up where I think the community around the client-side advertiser, the client-side marketeer, needs to really take a look at what they believe to be was working in the past. And it did work, right? We paid for advertising and the money coming, etc. This is going to change the dynamic of the industry. Yeah. And it's not necessarily the sky's falling in, but there's an opportunity to reevaluate what you believe to be happening with your agency partners or directly, because I don't believe that I certainly didn't have an understanding of what was actually going on, because it worked.
Right. So to paraphrase, just so I'm clear, you'd assume the cookie was a lot more powerful than it was actually in your marketing that you were doing, but you wouldn't be comfortable doing nothing today when cookies were switched off because you wouldn't be achieving the same results.
Well, and if I know there's something significant potentially going to change in, I think Gartner's figures they produced 10 months ago was between 68 and 80% of the marketing output in B2B is delivered via digital platform.
Right.
If you include radio in that figure. So if I know that the digital mechanisms are going to be affected potentially negatively, then that's a significant part of my marketing capability I need to be looking at. At least questioning inquiry. Do I fully understand how that's being delivered into market? I haven't had to concern myself with that in the past. This change is going to be a stimulus and a catalyst for really reevaluating and looking at that.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you for that. And come back to you, Riaz, as well, on the GA4 solutions. That suddenly came in, didn't it? It was quite a surprise, which I would have thought is why the CMA is getting a bit concerned around Google's activities and making sure everyone's ready, because that was just, analysis as opposed to actually generating business.
Yes, and I mean, let's face it, GA4 from Google's perspective is not going to have a hit on their bottom line for the most part. But switching off third-party cookies is going to have a massive impact on their bottom line. And so it's in Google's interests to make this switch over more smoothly than GA4. The difference is the impact. The impact is just the same. The impact is just as big. We've now had 4 years to plan and figure out what we were going to do about this change. It will be 5 years before it finally switches off. But today, for where we're at, we're still not ready. Right? The alternative solutions are now coming onto the market, and there's options there. But actually, the solution that Google is proposing, it's as you say, it's not yet independent enough from Google, so Google has too much control. It's not yet replacing, so I'm sure many of us in the room do retargeting advertising. Whilst there are some new techniques coming online that will allow you to do that, the actual specific ability to retarget in the way we do today has not even been tested yet.
Right.
And so that's still to come. And so this isn't going to be, unfortunately, we need to jump and switch. It's going to be something we need to figure out the alternatives, implement those alternatives, but then there's going to be, and this is the opportunity for everybody in the room, there's going to be opportunities for new ways to advertise and do things.
Which I think is a lovely segue into the next section.
Perfect.
Which is where we so this is what we should be thinking about now. So the first thing to think about is first-party data. So it's capturing data directly ourselves on people interested in our services who are visiting us. And I don't know if you've got any examples or things you'd like to sort of comment on?
I think first-party data is incredibly important. But I think anybody who only relies on first-party data is in trouble. Everybody should be trying to build awareness and nurture their existing first-party audience. And so it's absolutely critical. You have control, it's not being switched off. You can retarget those first-party cookies for the moment.
Yeah.
But that's going to change as well.
Right.
But it's so important.
I'll go back to that point, actually. I'm just going to touch briefly on the GA4 piece as well.
All right.
I just want to get a step back. There's something I want to say. There's that Google has come out and said quite clearly the internet's a B2C mechanism. So they're focused in providing analytics for B2C. They're using machine modeling to give analytics. Well, we don't, in B2B, typically have the volume for that machine learning or AI to be effective in terms of analytics. And they've kind of said that's okay because we're looking at 98% of our business. So I would hazard a guess that a majority of people in the room who are running client-side advertising programs have had analytics problems in the last 6 months. So that's another signifier as to this. That's part of that marketing mix, part of your activity. This triggers, is a catalyst for you need to look at other solutions and not, dare I say it, I know we're being recorded, cede or continue to cede control to several private companies. You need to take your ownership, first party, generating your own data. And And we've been working that through probably as an organisation and an entity and a skill set in terms of producing first party. I think that's got to be accelerated. You know, and lo and behold, get rid of the gated assets, etc.
Yeah.
But offering value so that your targets and your prospects volunteer their information is going to be a much higher priority than it's been in the past.
And unfortunately much harder to do
And
today.
much harder to do.
Right. Okay. So we've got first-party data. We've then got second and third-party data, where organisations are still out there capturing information that we can use. So all the demographics or the firmographics of the organisations, size, additional information there. So that's still going to be available. They're going to find ways to actually capture that. All the information is, it's not a sort of GDPR consideration.
Yeah, the mechanisms by which you buy it will change at the moment. So for third-party data, obviously, effectively that's the first, you'll be using that third party to do the targeting for you. I guess in a similar way to when GDPR came out with email, sending an email through the publisher's send rather than through you taking the list from the publisher and doing the send. Same sort of principle with advertising, I think will happen.
Okay.
So publisher data becomes more valuable, which as a marketer, probably not the best news because that means it costs us more money. So.
But I would say also then at that point, this is where, as a consumer and someone in the industry, I think we've been guilty of wasting a lot of time and effort in broad brush advertising. Yeah. God knows I get spammed by the Daily Mail. I hate the bloody thing. But there's, you know, that clickbait, whatever you want to term it. So if this forces us to focus on premium publishers, who in their own right are really threatened by several things from Google at the moment. I was at the PPA in March, I think it was. It's fascinating insights to how they're reacting to several different stimulus on their side of this industry. They're genuinely worried. So what they're doing is spending a lot of time and effort producing their own premium content on the basis that we'll pay for that directly.
Right.
So there's opportunities, whereas we've been probably a little bit complacent or complicit, without a doubt, from a client-side marketer's point of view, in accepting the status quo. This is going to get us to stop and just look up and pay a bit more attention to what you have assumed has been working or not working, and maybe go back around and talk to, and either with third parties such as FunnelFuel or other providers in the agency network, or go and talk to those publishers directly and re-establish relationships you may have had years ago. I started off in that part of the business where I had direct relationships. I would encourage people to take a look back at that, because that's going to be more valuable in the near future than it has been in the last probably 4 or 5 years. Okay.
But there are other solutions out there today, aren't there?
Yeah.
And organisations are using those successfully. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the easy one, which is contextual. Contextual's been around since the beginning of the internet. It was never very good at the beginning of the internet because it was self-declared. And so you were relying on the publisher to tell you who they were, which is not really in the marketer's interests. Today, that's completely different. The contextual industry has evolved dramatically, and you have the ability to use forms of AI, so NLP, to segment the pages that you appear on. About 7 years ago, so I'm from Radiate B2B, so we do some of these new types of advertising solutions. 7 years ago, we did a test where we took IP-based targeting with contextual, and we compared it to IP-based targeting with cookies. And we tested it across UK, Europe, and North America. And what we found was that the contextual plus IP performed as well in North America as the cookies, and between 20 and 30% better in the UK.
Right.
And even more so in Europe. And so contextual can be a good way for you to replace quite easily the loss in targeting, assuming you can make that tech work for you contextually, obviously. The alternative is what I was just talking about, which is IP-based. For most of us in the B2B world, we're targeting a niche upon a niche, right? When most people talk about niches, they talk about retail or they talk about manufacturing, right? I was listening this morning to somebody, they're talking about different segments. For most of us, we don't want to target every retailer in the market. We want to target a subset of those retailers. Maybe it's growing retailers, maybe it's retailers who've adopted a specific tech. And so IP-based targeting allows you to actually go and select your companies and then target those. And so that gets over because it doesn't use cookies at all to do that. And so that's a modern solution that solves that problem.
Okay, fantastic.
I think also I wanted to add to that in terms of the targeting is that I've sort of termed it as the consumerization of the business channel, as it were, that post-COVID, personally, I'm now far more accepting of a business message in my consumer life. And so the tech now has moved to a standard that as a B2B marketeer and working with the guys here at FunnelFuel, we're now far more accepting of other channels in addition to the standard advertising via online. So you've got an omni-channel approach that is now becoming much more effective in delivering with targeting than we've ever had in the past. And I'm getting, and there's the tin hat brigade about you mentioned something and Alexa hears you, and all of a sudden my Netflix account pops up with an advert, and it happened a couple of times last week. I'm okay with that now. So the ability now for a B2B marketeer, if they want to go in a certain segment and go into that segment via additional omni-channel vehicles than we have probably done in the past, is now coming to us. So there's another thing to look at. Out of home, you saw some of it today on the stage. We've done a bit of a test this morning, and it worked. Was it radio, digital, TV? That is now becoming a tool that we have not had the ability effectively to target and use in the past. It's now coming to us. So there's another opportunity, again, catalysed by the changes we've got coming up. We could do things better and differently moving forwards. We've just got to, step into it and lean into it to take the advantage.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've heard is we don't necessarily know what the future solutions will be yet because they haven't been fully developed. But the ones that are in existence today are effective. So I think one of the messages to take away from this session is if you're not already testing other solutions, go out there and start doing it now. Don't wait to panic next year when suddenly things get switched off. And, organisations are doing very well out of that as well.
And that's why I'd offer that the survey that we've got open, as you said, it's still going to the end of July. We've put that in place with B2B marketing here as just wanting to get an indicator as to where people are in the journey. And we'll publish that openly at the back end of the month, beginning of August. And part of that will be then working together with B2B marketing to set out some content or whatever is required to assist the industry moving forwards. Just the stand there, if you want, there's a QR code, you can log in directly on the stand, but I'd welcome the input along the way.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Shivani, have you got time for any questions? No. So Shivani's there with her mic. So we have a gentleman over there with his hand raised. It's in the middle.
Probably one of my team. It's a plant. Actually, we'll find out. Yeah. No, I don't know.
I have an observation and a question. The observation first. The assumption that Google stands to lose if they don't handle third-party cookies correctly is fundamentally wrong. This isn't up for debate. It's just wrong. The reason it's wrong is because if you as an advertiser do not know whether or not Google's solutions are working, you actually are more likely to spend more money. That coupled with their recent advances in AI, so Performance Max, if you know what that is, just means you as an advertiser have less control and also know less whether or not it's working. So you're almost going back to the days of when, I forget who it was, said 50% of my advertising works, damned if I know which 50%. Sure. That's exactly what Google is getting at. That's not a debate, it's a fact. The question is, first-party data. I hear that bandied about a lot, that first-party data is a good thing to use, but I struggle to hear good examples of how first-party data can be used in the absence of third-party cookies. So do any of you have some great examples that you've used and found to be actually working with first-party data? I'm assuming we're not talking about going back to email and where we need to go back to spamming people on our email list, or maybe we are, I don't know. I'd love to hear it.
To your first point, and to be controversial, I had a specific example of what you said where, this is a few years back, which was the genesis of why I'm here today, working in the company I'm working, with the CEO, who was my agency CEO at the time I was a client. And I put a lot of money on paid. And I walked into the boardroom for the first time in my career not having any answers on why my entire budget had just dropped off the cliff, my innovation budget, and the agency couldn't answer the questions either. I then realized I'd ceded my digital destiny to Google. So I pulled the money and did something else. I did direct mail. And that's me being pig-headed. But it started I've given my budget to a third party, another organization, and I didn't get anything back because I paid for clicks, etc., and it was all rubbish. And no one would query that. And that irked me, which is why, we discussed this earlier on, why am I doing what I'm doing? That one point in time led me to where I am today. So I take your point, it depends on the individual, but when you're paying for something, you don't get the returns, why would you go back and do it again?
Okay. So the question about first-party data?
I think, so I've got an example with some of our clients. They are collecting first-party data not through sign-ups and form conversions. They're collecting first-party data through web visitor identification. So they identify the companies, they know who the personas are likely to be, and then they're retargeting those companies with advertising that typically is nurture-based. So they've got a campaign that's their net new, they've got a campaign for all the website visitors, they've got a campaign, actually got a campaign for their LinkedIn followers in this particular case. So, and so using that from their first party, and what they typically will see, I don't think this is a surprise, is that the people who visited the site and are engaging, so not just the people who've come to look at the career pages on your site, but obviously are looking at the right types of pages, they are 2 to 3 times more likely to enter the pipeline than if you are targeting your ICP generally. So that's an example of how you use first party. The problem with it is when you boil it down to numbers, right, raw numbers, is the number of people who are coming to your site versus the size of your market is dramatically different. So you can't just do first party, but you need to take advantage of that first party because it's going to drive your pipeline.
Great. Thank you very much for that question. So we are now out of time. So hopefully that was useful to you. Hopefully it's given you some food for thought. If you want to use any of these slides to create your own internal cases for acting now rather than later, please use those. But yeah, cookies aren't going to be around in the future, so we need to find something different to still get the same results. Thank you.